Hello, my name is Edwin Rutsch, and I'm the director of the Empathy Center located here in beautiful Santa Barbara, California. The center's mission is to build the empathy movement and to raise the level of empathy in society through education and community building initiatives.
And my name is Anita Nowak. I teach at McGill University, and I'm the author of Purposeful Empathy, a book that invites readers to turn up the volume of empathy in their lives.
And at the beginning of 2024, Anita and I co-hosted the Empathy Summit, brought to you by the Empathy Center, and more than 40 authors of books about empathy participated.
They shared what their book was about, why they were motivated to write it, and what they hope readers will take away. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope you'll buy their book. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce Dr. Maureen Linker, who is an award-winning professor of philosophy at the University of Michigan, Dearborn. She leads workshops on diversity fatigue, navigating difficult dialogues, and finding common ground through intellectual empathy. She is the author of Intellectual Empathy, Critical Thinking for Social Justice. Welcome, Maureen.
Thank you, Anita. Took a second to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Anita and Edwin, for the invitation to be here. And also thank you to my fellow speakers and attendees for taking time to share what we've learned and what we need to know more about in terms of empathy. So as Anita said, I'm a professor of philosophy at University of Michigan, Dearborn. So this is a regional campus of University of Michigan. And for those who don't know, Dearborn is kind of an interesting, there's interesting demographics with Dearborn. We're about 30 miles west of the city of Detroit, which has, one of the largest Black populations for an urban center. We are also, Dearborn itself is home to the largest per capita of Arab American Muslims and Arab American Christians in the United States. It's been parodied in places like The Simpsons that we live under Sharia law in Dearborn. But our campus also draws from students in rural areas north of the Dearborn area and students from the suburbs. So we have an interesting and real wide range of diversity on our campus. I came to University of Michigan Dearborn from New York City, where I grew up in Brooklyn. I'm a CUNY grad through and through from undergrad and grad. So I had assumed I was quite familiar with metropolitan regions, that this was going to be, a smaller version of what I'd experienced. But in terms of the range of diversity and the kind of the microcosm for what I saw, what many of us saw as real issues facing the United States were coming together in this region. Everything from 9/11. So I started teaching right before 9/11 happened to see what that did to the Arab Muslim community in our region, to the decline of manufacturing and what that was doing to the region. So there were quite a few issues. And in the midst of this, I'm teaching logic and critical thinking. And what I kept seeing over and over again when I was teaching logical and critical thinking was that students would engage in controversial topics and arguments. And in philosophy, we're teaching arguments. And in my own research prior to coming in my dissertation, I had been looking at the adversarial nature of argumentation in philosophy and in history and the gender dimensions of that. So that was kind of a theoretical bent I had. But in actually teaching intro level logic and critical thinking courses, students would engage with some of the controversial arguments, but they wouldn't place themselves and their reactions, and they wouldn't communicate what was happening. So for instance, if we were looking at arguments about affirmative action and there was a Black student arguing for affirmative action and a white student arguing against it, those two students, as well as everybody else in the class watching, would be making inferences and judgments about the social identities of the people who are arguing, but not articulating that in the process of evaluating the arguments. So that was a frustration for me. How do I get students to talk through their experiences, how they're estimating and assessing evidence on the basis of their own social identities? It was so risky. for them to do it. And I saw it happening in other places where conversations around complex issues around race and gender and identity and politics were breaking down because people were not able to articulate their standpoint because it was so risky. In the midst of this, I was also trying to work on group work and how we could more effectively work across cross-cultural differences, but I needed people to identify them. And something happened in a class that was particularly motivating for me. So it was a group project, and there was a young woman, let's call her Zainab, who wore a hijab. And there was another student, a white male student named Sean, who was from a white young man from a suburban area. And they were working on a project. And at one point, through some exercises we were doing about cross-cultural differences, Sean had reached out to shake Zainab's hand, and she put her hands together and kind of bowed. And he said, "Why aren't you shaking my hand?" And she said, "Well, it's for me, religiously, I don't touch men. I don't touch men. I don't know. And I'm very happy to greet you, but this is the way that I greet you, but it's not through touching." And so over the course of, some work together, Sean said, that's a really, it seems like such an ancient, outdated thing to live like that. Again, we are facilitating and talking through some of this. And Zainab, said that, I understand that that's how you're feeling about this, but, this is my practice and it needs to be respected. And then several weeks later, Sean came in and he had on his forehead what looked to Zainab like a cross in ashes. And so she asked him, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, it's Ash Wednesday, and we're Catholics, and we symbolize that through ashes on our forehead." And she said, "That seems like a pretty ancient practice to engage in. It's interesting that you do that." So that to me was a real aha moment, because I thought, what's going on here is an absolute failure of analogical reasoning, but it's reasoning about our identities and about our lived experiences. And fortunately, these two students were continuing to work together, continuing to communicate, helped the rest of our class to talk through what was going on in that situation. And for me, that's what motivated ultimately writing the book, was that what we need in critical thinking and logic is a way to reason analogically through our experiences, because there's a lack of identity with each other because we see our experiences as so radically different. And in many cases, the core grounding of those differences are not so radically different. They're experienced from different standpoints and in different ways, but there are elements of common ground that we could reach. So that was the impetus for the book, really to argue that storytelling, like David was just talking about storytelling, I think storytelling is evidence. When we tell our stories, we're providing evidence of our experience. And I see empathy not as I'm walking in your shoes, because I can never walk in your shoes. I can never know the experiences as you've lived them, but I can learn and understand about your experiences. And more importantly, I could learn and understand about your experiences so that I can see how you see me. Because that, I think, has been a major failure with my students, is to think about how they are seen from others, particularly students with privilege. So students who live on the margins already have to think about the majority, like Du Bois' notion of double consciousness, right? When you live on the margins, you have to know about the majority culture. But when you live in a majority culture, if you're white or straight or heterosexual, you don't think as much about how you are perceived by others. Christian, in this case.
1 minute.
So the book is an effort to try to come up with a methodology for healing and repairing these dialogues that break down. I'll leave you with one image that I've used with my students that has, well, I won't leave you with that one image. I have 1 minute, so I won't do that. But anyway, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. And I'm very happy to share ideas in the circle or any questions you may have, but thank you for the time.
Maureen, share your picture, share it. We're all curious to see it.
It's not a happy picture, but it says the host has disabled screen sharing. So
we've already moved on.
Much time.
You could maybe drop it in the chat then. Maybe
I'll do that.
Yeah,
I'll do that.
Okay.
Good idea. Thank you.
Thank you so much.